If you were a father today, what would you be doing differently? And what do you think fathers get wrong sometimes?
If I were a father, I think I would go about parenting in a more open style. I want to teach them about the world and explain my reasonings for things instead of just saying no or instead of just getting upset. You can't just say, no, you can't stay out that late because I said so. I want to have a more open dialogue with my kid and say I would love you to have fun, but you cannot stay out this late. You have a soccer game tomorrow morning. Sleep is important because of this and this and this. You're going to thank me in the morning when you feel a lot better. I think that's the style of parenting that I'd like to adopt.
We say fatherhood matters, but the system still acts like dads are just a backup plan. Ahead on Speaking of Kids. Hey, ambassadors, it's Sally here, and I just want to say wherever you're listening from, welcome. Whether you're listening to this in between running errands, on the school drop-off line, or if you've carved out a rare moment of quality time just for yourself, I'm glad you're here. If you're new to this show, you'll notice I call everybody ambassadors because we at First Focus believe that's exactly what you are. You're showing up and you're paying attention. You're thinking about how to make things actually better for kids and for our future. And we're not talking about just your kids. I believe and trust that if you're listening to this, you have a vested interest in supporting all kids. We believe that taking big actions like calling your member of Congress or writing an op-ed, or small actions like reposting or making a $20 donation, it all counts. And here we try our best to honor and celebrate every action and every part of that. Now, today's episode, I'm sitting down with someone I've known since 7th grade, which is wild to me. He's someone whose life has taken him from soup kitchens to state houses, from fatherhood to food policy, and he has seen how everything touches kids' lives. If you've ever wondered how your neighborhood school board meeting connects to summer camp access, or what a line outside of a food pantry says about our shared priorities, this one's for you. Today, we're talking to my friend Jered Bruzas. And the thing I love about Jered is he brings a very interesting perspective to a lot of conversations. He's a father of 4. He's a former seminary dropout, and his nickname in high school was Father. He is my Republican bestie. And what I love the most about him is while we have, in some cases, very different approaches to policy and programs and the way we approach our work, we still have the same North Star. Welcome, Jered. How are you?
Michelle, I'm excellent. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to spending some time with you this morning.
Me too. So for our audience, Jered and I go way back.
It's been a minute.
A little while, from Plainville, Connecticut.
Absolutely. Since 6th grade. So we're looking, we won't age you, but I'll age myself for over 30 years at this point.
That is crazy. And combined, we have 7 children.
Just a couple. Just
Just a little bit of some entertainment around the house.
Just to make it fun.
How are the kids doing?
The kids are good. The kids are excellent. They just got their passports yesterday or the day before, so they're all excited to start to try to explore our world a little bit more. So we've got a family vacation plan this summer and also a fun trip down to DC, which we hope to see you and your 3 little ones.
I cannot wait. And you're going to be doing some important work in DC.
Yeah, we'll be up on the Hill, working alongside of our fellow United Way folks. As you know, I work for the Great United Way of Greater Waterbury, which is part of the United Way network. And so we are going to be going down to the Hill to do some advocacy, but also strengthen our relationship around some policy issues that we're all really deeply concerned about.
So, and to that point, Jered, in your work, you must see the impact of how policy, culture, funding, all impact kids' lives. How are things playing out in, the first 90 days of this administration and just trends more recently?
Yeah, interesting, right? So I wear a couple different hats. So I have the kind of policy experience in my work as a United Way Chief Impact Officer, but also as an elected board member in our little fun town of Plainville. I see it on a different different perspectives, right? As a dad, as a board member, but also as a community advocate and someone who is deeply ingrained in different aspects of the community. And one of those aspects definitely is education, right? Deeply aware of the issues and challenges that families like ours are experiencing. I often think about some of the challenges that kids have around access or inaccess, whether it's kids having the ability to access technology or no technology and what that looks like, right? So for families in our community that don't have the resources to pay for internet and smartphones and laptops, but then also the challenges of those families that do have those bits of technology, right? Kids being siloed, being in their homes and not being in the community, not playing, or having access to content that parents are trying to keep them from, but may not necessarily can keep them from, including parenting grandparents, right, that may not be as aware of technology and how to safeguard their grandchildren that they're taking care of as parents. A lot of many different multifaceted things. This weekend, I'm taking 2 of the kids to the Mattituck Museum here in Waterbury. And there's a really beautiful museum here that is open to the community in many different ways. And I'm fortunate to fund part of their work through a grant that we provide them. But this weekend, our kids will go back down, 2 of the kids will go back down to a homeless art show where folks who are experiencing homelessness that are usually living in the woods or abandoned buildings are able to do some really great art. Kind of forget about the state of their homelessness for a little while with some of the therapists in the community that actually would go into the woods or in abandoned buildings and doing some art projects. So those art pieces will be on display. My kids are fortunate to be able to participate in those things. But I think about all the little kids in the community that don't have access to these cultural enrichment activities, and including over the summer camps and all the other things. With regards to the thought of, some of the cuts and some of the challenges that we're experiencing, those are real, right? And it's only going to get heightened, and opportunities for children that don't have means or resources, or that ALICE population, that asset limited, income constrained, and employed families, or those families that are below ALICE that don't have access to disposable income to be able to go pay for a ticket at the Palace Theater here in Waterbury, for example, or the Mattituck Museum, or all the other different cultural sites that we have in the community. That's real. And so as those cuts come down and there's less availability for museums to be able to give free access, unfortunately, kids and families will lose out on those opportunities. That will be impactful, unfortunately.
And, to that point, at First Focus, we really center the cross of issues impacting kids, right? So like even the things that you had noted, there's absolutely an impact on an education level. But we know that, for example, if families cannot even afford to buy groceries, I just placed an order for some eggs and I couldn't believe that it was $13.99 for 18 eggs. You'll appreciate this. My little one, my 2-year-old, he was helping me in the kitchen. He accidentally cracked an egg and it landed on the counter. And I said, "Oh no, baby, we're not throwing that out. We'll throw that in the batter."
Yeah.
But, to your point, like homelessness and, the state of a family's economics play a huge role. Have you noticed an increase in outreach around food pantries and homelessness rates for children? And we also know it's hard to always capture rates for children homelessness.
Yeah, it's real. So part of my professional life, I help oversee the Greater Waterbury Food Resource Collaborative. I have somebody on my team that is very intimately involved. So food insecurity is as a really large component of my work, but also personally. I serve on the board of directors for one of the largest food banks in the nation, Connecticut Food Share. We just had our board meeting the other morning and talking about some of the concerns and issues that we're experiencing as a food bank that distributes food to all of the 169 towns and cities in the state of Connecticut. It's real, right? I also see firsthand, as we're going through the different soup kitchens and food pantries, the number of families that are accessing food. The challenge is many folks aren't eligible for supplemental food benefits from the federal government, right? Those SNAP benefits that we're familiar with because income guidelines. That said, though, because of the rising cost of utilities and rent and mortgages and all the other things that people are experiencing, more and more people are accessing food than ever before. So it's becoming a bit of a perfect storm where there's less money being given from the federal government, including some cuts recently, in addition to the increased needs and the level of donations staying stagnant or going down with food banks. It's becoming a huge problem. So there's greater need, but yet there's less resources going around. It's kind of heartbreaking to see. I recently was telling the story and I got choked up. I promise I won't this time. But I used to run a soup kitchen and food pantry as part of programs that I oversaw here in the city. And I just remember the large number of families, and a number of them were undocumented about 5 years ago, that were wrapped around the soup kitchen and food pantry program that I used to oversee. And it was a cold, bitter morning, like cold. And actually it was part of a state of emergency. It was so cold in Connecticut at that time. And what really broke me, and we just had, I think we had our third or fourth at the time was just born. And what broke me was the amount of little children that were my kids' age, right? And my wife being from South America, and these families that were standing in line on this cold day waiting for food. It was pretty heartbreaking. Those are typical scenes, not just in the cold months, but, in the summer heat where you have families standing outside looking for food. And we know that kids can't thrive in the classroom if they're not fed well, right? If they don't have access to nutritious and healthy food. We also know that kids can't thrive if they don't even have a bed, right? So the amount of kids that we're seeing that are experiencing homelessness, that don't have access to a bed to sleep on, to get a good night's sleep so they can thrive in the classroom. Right. These are all things that impact the whole child that we as United Way and me personally are deeply concerned about, because we know that kids can't thrive if they don't have those basic necessities, things that many of us just take for granted, don't even really think about. Right. And that we know that kids, not just in the inner cities, but in the suburbs, are also experiencing. So it's a huge challenge and a problem. Right. And it's something that we're deeply cognizant about. And we feel we have an obligation to try to support to the best we can.
That's what gets lost in some of these conversations, like especially at the federal level, the more public narrative that's being shared. These are actual kids' lives, and they don't vote. They can't go to the grocery store by themselves. And again, at First Focus, we really try to center kids at the basis of these arguments and really center them in policy conversations and budget conversations. So often the narrative gets shifted to the faults of the parents or the shortcomings of the parents. And, while you can debate that, there's still children in line.
Right.
There's still children without a bed. There's still children that go hungry. And all those things impact their well-being and their overall progress, which at a macro level impacts our country, right? Our competitiveness, our global competitiveness. And so we are really aiming to shift this conversation to really center the needs of kids. And you will see that return on investment rapidly. 8% of federal funds go to children. They make up 25% of the population. And so, we know that there has to be a shift there. Okay, ambassadors, we're going to take a quick break. But don't go anywhere, because when we come back, Jered and I get into something a little deeper. We talk about what keeps him grounded, especially when work gets hard, when you're seeing kids go hungry, and when meetings don't seem to move the needle fast enough. And we talk about faith, a thing that feels like it gets buried in polite conversations and cuts us off from people we strive to be. Faith in a real, lived, this is what gets me out of bed and back into the fight kind of way. So stay with us. It's worth it. Jered, one of the things that we share in common is our faith. I've always known you to be a strong man of faith. Your Catholic background has really intersected in the way that you approach life and the way that you approach work. How has it impacted the way, you do approach advocacy and policy priorities?
Yeah, I think it's a huge part of our life, right? I think it's definitely balanced and bridled. I've worked and managed Catholic organizations in the past, and also recognizing that many of my staff, aren't Catholic or Christian, and being respectful of each person's individual beliefs or non-beliefs, I think is really important. But for me personally and for our family, it's really important to who we are at our core. And I say in the office a lot here, it's not about us, right? It's never about us. It's about the work. It's about the people that we're called to serve and to serve. I really feel in a real visceral way that for our household, we have a moral obligation that is deeply rooted in our Christian tradition to serve the least fortunate in our community. And we do that, in living out And in a real tangible way with the Catholic Church would call the corporal works of mercy, and reaching out to those that are imprisoned or unhoused, don't have clothing and food and things like that. And so I'm fortunate, and I remind my CEO this all the time, sometimes when we're in meetings. We get paid to do this, right? Which is great. So I'm getting paid to do a job that I love, but I'm also getting paid to do a job that is impactful and really making real system change and direct, tangible change in people's lives every day. So I think for us and in our house, and for me, my Christian Catholic faith has really helped to set a foundation of my worldview and the work that we do, and why we do what we do, and recognize during those hard times, because there are hard times like we're experiencing now with cuts and with challenges and increased need, to help with some self-care, right? Because we know that it's easy to get burnt out. And we as providers often experience some significant trauma, right? I still have some of those sleepless nights thinking about some of the cases when I directed a shelter. And you can't not be touched by these children and knowing the traumas they experience or traumas they experience while in shelter. I think for us as a family, and for me personally, my faith life is really important. It's a way in which we're able to help balance some of that self-care. It's what kind of stabilizes and grounds me in our house.
That's beautiful. And to that point, you had mentioned that your wife is from South America. You hail from Puerto Rico.
Absolutely.
Immigrant children and families right now are really going through a lot. What have you noticed across Connecticut as it relates to children of immigrants?
Yeah, it's challenging. It's complexing. In our little town of Plainville, there were, as there really weren't many Black kids in Plainville, right? Let's just be real. There's much more diversity since you and I were little kids in Plainville. Almost 10% of our kids now, Misselage, in Plainville in our district are monolingual.
Wow.
Right. So for our little town of Plainville that has a little less than 18,000 people, just a few years ago, that was kind of unheard of, right? Even just the diversity of children, as we know, many of the Black and brown kids in our school were bused in from the city of Hartford into our little suburb, which is about 15, 20 minutes west of the city of Hartford. It's very different now, right? So I'm at our school a lot, probably at least 2 or 3 times a week, being on the Board of Ed and just being very engaged and involved in our kids' school. My wife happened to actually work in our kids' school, which is wonderful. But it's very, very different, right? Immigration is having some challenges, right? There's also the costs that a lot of these districts are experiencing that never had before. So for example, we had to hire a couple of additional teachers this year to be able to provide supports for some of those students. When I think of large districts like the city that I'm working in right now, I'm in beautiful downtown Waterbury, there's 60% of the kids in this district are now Latino. But overall, though, if you look at the entire city, it's not 60% Latino. It's usually, I think it's about 30% or so. So, there is an impact, and it also has an impact on budgets, whether we like it or not. The reality is we have to educate the children in our care. We're mandated by the federal and state laws to do that, but providing remedial support and early literacy programs, as well as, bilingual supports or monolingual supports is quite costly and expensive. And that does have an impact on municipalities that haven't budgeted for that, or maybe just barely making it in the first place. And so we're seeing that immigration and children and the things that they need are different. It's more complex. But I also worry and think about immigrant children and their access to food, to healthcare, the housing component. It's very multifaceted. There's so many complex issues and challenges that immigrant children experience. And also similar to what my wife had experienced when she came here from Ecuador at age 9, right? Or my mom, when she came over here, I think she was like 11 or so when they moved from Puerto Rico to New Britain. Although they're American citizens, some of the stereotypes and stigmas and challenges that she experienced as a child and not knowing the language was quite real, and still some trauma that she will talk about every now and then that she experienced moving here when she was just heading into middle school.
And to that point, there are real needs that not only, budget is definitely a huge concern. Another layer to that is a pipeline of teachers and a pipeline of resources that, at least at the federal level, when we talk to our partners across the country, they recognize that there's a real shortage of mental health providers, dual language teachers, and specialists of that nature. And so As things shift, to your point, our small town and many towns and many cities and many states across the country, there's going to need to be some real strategy there to really attack the multifaceted needs of these children and families.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Jered, you are a walking image of what I view in my mind to be an ambassador for children. Dedicated father, community leader, advocate, not only for your 4 little kids, but for others too, across the community. If you could change a thing that you see for kids growing up in this moment, what would you really target for change and growth?
So that's tough, Massage. I mean, there's so many different things that kids need access to. If there's one thing that I would like to see, especially as a Latino dad and as a dad in the community, is getting dads engaged in their children's lives, especially in certain cultures, right? Or in certain demographics. When I think of like the BIPOC community where there is a real decline in dads living in the home or being present or actively engaged in their children's lives, I think there's a real opportunity there. The reality is children need their dads present and actively engaged in their lives. And we're seeing that without them, families continue to struggle. For us, we're fortunate we have now, for a long time, we only had a 1-income house where my wife stayed home with the kids because it was just too expensive to provide childcare for our kids. So she stayed home, but now that she's working, it's a huge help, right? I think of the many households here in our community and statewide and even nationally that have just one person working in the home. How do they make it, right? It's very difficult to have a single family household. And if dad isn't actively engaged and a part of their children's lives, it makes it that much harder. So if there's one thing that I would really like to see change is fostering a greater understanding of and the importance of dads in their children's lives. And like little simple things. I'll give you an example of this. So I'm very ingrained in the kids' school. All the teachers know me, right? All of them, including all the support staff. My wife works in the school. She can't pop out and leave to be able to get the kids. So who usually does? I do, right? And so I never get the phone call. It's always my wife calls or texts me, say, hey, somebody's sick. You got to pick up the kids. How come she's getting the call? She can't leave the room. I can leave, right? Usually, typically, it's kind of hard sometimes, but it's usually me that's doing it. Or the doctor's office. They have my contact information because my wife's schedule is not nearly as flexible as mine. I usually do most of the doctor's appointments, but I never get the phone call. We have this mindset here where it's always the mom is the one that's responsible for many of the aspects of the children's lives, and we're not including the dads. So, for example, my wife just texted me this morning. So Mikey's got a follow-up appointment that I'm taking him to at 4:15. She got the call saying that the practitioner is being switched from one office to another. She's not taking him, I'm taking him. But that's just another example of the way in which systems view fatherhood and their importance or their relevance, right? And we have to change that. Dads are engaged. Dads are here. We are present. We have an active role in raising our children, equal as to their mothers, but yet we're never engaged in the process. Right? We have to switch that, and especially for families who may not live together, where both parents don't live together, even more so, right? Because there may not be that full loop and line of communication. So if there's one thing that I would change as part of our fatherhood initiative here that I think is really important is changing the way in which we look at dads in the community.
That is a very interesting perspective because coming from a mom, I think we are happy to get rid of some of that mental load.
No, are you sure about that?
we would be happy.
But it's real.
To reroute the call immediately. When you're in DC, you have to connect with Jimmy Gomez, who actually leads the Dads Caucus on the Hill. They're doing really important work there because that is shifting. And that's important to know.
I'm writing that down.
Yes, no, absolutely. We do a lot of work with them, and it's important. All right, Jered, we ask every guest that's on here to share a song or an album that really inspires them when, it's just a hard day.
I'm not a huge music person.
Oh my gosh.
So honestly, going back to the other question you asked me about how my faith is important in my life. And so to be honest with you, I listen to K-Love. And so it's a national Christian radio station. That's what's playing on my way in and out, unless I'm not making phone calls, because I usually try to maximize my time on the way in and on the way out to extend my day a bit. But so if I'm not taking phone calls and trying to wrap up my day on my way home, I'm listening to K-Love, which is another great way that I kind of get myself into a different spirit as I'm traveling from a hectic day in the office and transitioning into dad mode, which is much more harder than being in the office. As I run home to cook and help with homework, and then usually some evening meetings because I serve on way too many boards and commissions and committees. So I don't necessarily have a single song, Miss Elledge, or an album.
I can understand that. I've been leaning heavily on gospel in this season of my life, and there's some hits there. So I don't know if you've ever heard of the song Always, and I'm trying to think of who sings.
So why don't you sing it for me? Maybe I'll be able to identify.
I'll send you a link.
That's great.
Jered, thank you so much for being here. Your perspective is very helpful for our audience, and it's really important, and I think you bringing your voice to DC, because right now, our elected officials need to hear from people in the community, all these changes, period, regardless of just what's happening right now in this administration, we need more participation from constituents from across the country.
You know what? So just on a closing note, I'm pretty fortunate that we're able to engage our elected officials regularly, both here in our federal delegation, but also our local delegation. I meet regularly, whether it's in Hartford, which I go up to quite often, or even taking them out into the woods, into the streets. I do what are called legislative tours very frequently, and I'm very close with all of our legislators on both sides of the aisle. And you'd really be surprised how both sides really come together on certain topics, especially around food and homelessness, that we're able to get both some really staunch conservative Republicans and really progressive liberals in the woods having the same conversation and showing the same level of compassion and concern and recognizing that there's a need that they can do more together. And so that's a really fun part of my job, of bringing folks that are really on polar opposite sides of the spectrum together to really affect change in our community. And we do that pretty regularly, which is great. And we're seeing the fruit of that with some really strong bipartisan legislation here in our Connecticut General Assembly around food, where there's a co-sponsored bill from folks on very far opposing sides of the aisle that are coming together to address the need for food in our community. So that's just one great example of that.
I am so glad that you've highlighted that, because that's what we need. I've been at First Focus now for 13 years, and it's been a little demoralizing, honestly, to see, at least at a federal level, the lack of bipartisanship around some issues that these shouldn't be partisan issues. And for First Focus, we are really committed to working with anyone that's working to advance the lives of kids. And a lot of these policies are nuanced and they're vast. And so, if you can get somebody coming together on nutrition or homelessness or, food insecurity or, whatever the issue is, there should be a way to really work together. And I hope, if we've learned nothing from this last wave or this current wave that we're in, is the need for us to really come together and the need for real bipartisan support, because these issues don't really care if you're Republican or Democrats, and kids don't care. They just need solutions.
Another good example of this, for the first time in the state of Connecticut, we have a homeless caucus, which is bipartisan, and over 30 members of our legislature. And just to give a little scale, our state Senate is only 32 members.
Wow.
Right. So there's a huge growing push and wave to support families around food and homelessness in a bipartisan and a comprehensive way. So a lot of great good is happening. I think it's these types of things where they can rally around each other and build those relationships, not vilify each other like we see in Washington. Having those strong relationships really help craft other pieces of legislation that are really important to make a difference. And it's great to see how we're able to utilize things like food and homelessness to bring legislators together to make a real change in our community.
There's nothing left to say. Thank you, Jered.
Thank you, Ms. Elledge. Good to see you as always. See you in DC shortly.
Yes. That's it for this episode of Speaking of Kids. Thanks for being here, ambassadors. These conversations matter, and they matter more when they're shared. So if something struck you today, send it to a friend, a coworker. You never know who might be looking for a way in. We know it's not possible for everyone to be full-time advocates. That's our job. But we can all be ambassadors, people who carry this care for kids into rooms we're already in. I'm Masela Chabibi, reminding you to keep your heart open, your mind curious, and your voice steady, because when you speak up for kids, you can really change the conversation. Speaking of Kids is a podcast by First Focus on Children. It's produced by Windhaven Productions in Blue Jay Atlantic. Elizabeth Wyndham is our supervising producer, Julia Wyndham is our editor, and Jay Woodward is our senior producer. For more information about this episode, head over to firstfocus.org.